Good afternoon and welcome to another Brown Girls in the Rain book club. This is number I don't know, but today we're discussing Georgina Lawton's Raceless. So before we get started, I am Anika, that is Sharaja, and let us get started. Sharaja, take it away with our synopsis of this memoir.
All right, so as Anika mentioned, the name of the book we're reading is Raceless by Georgina Lawton. It's the story of Georgina's life growing up as someone who was, I don't even know how to explain it, but she grew up not knowing what her actual racial identity was. So she grew up in a suburb of London in a white family surrounded by white neighbors, an entirely white community. And so growing up, she was always told that she was also white. But questions about her race and her ethnicity only got worse when she grew up and people started noticing her darker skin, the texture of her hair, the curliness of her hair. And when people would come up to her and say, "What are you?" she would only answer white because that's all she knows. And people would say, like, "You're not white, you're mixed with something." And it wasn't until her father passed away that she actually learned the truth. So her mother, back in like the 80s, had an affair, a one night stand with a black man, and 9 months later, it resulted in Georgina's birth. So the mother had not told anyone about this one night stand. She didn't tell her husband. So when the time to deliver the baby came, and at the hospital the baby came out not looking like her husband, normal situations would be like, people would question it automatically, being like, this child does not look like me. But something weird happened between her mother and father where they just decided that they weren't going to talk about it, and they were just going to not acknowledge how Georgina looked and just embrace the child, which it is admirable but very questionable in the fact that they just Georgina's whole life did not acknowledge the fact that she didn't look like them. She was clearly someone of another race. Like, I don't know if you can see the picture here, but they essentially tried to pass her off as white, and it caused a lot of psychological, emotional trauma for Georgina, because here she is, her family's telling her she's one thing, but then the world around her is telling her she's something else. And like I said, she didn't find out the truth until after her father passed away. And so she wrote the book, this memoir, as a way to learn more about her cultural identity as a mixed race black and white woman. But it was also a way to figure out why her mother kept this a secret. Why was it such a secret that she could not tell her daughter the truth about her ethnicity, about her race? And I thought it was a very interesting way to look at race and how mixed race children grow up in today's world. She was born in 1992, so she's very close to Anika and mine and Anika's age. And yeah, like, Anika, what was one of the aspects of the book that stood out to you?
At the beginning, when she talked about like trauma, because I felt like people don't realize how much trauma being in that situation actually like yields. Hold on, I took a picture of what page it was. Let me pull it up so I quote correctly. Okay, it says being perceived in a way that does not match with our own internal view of ourselves is a trauma that is deep enough to leave emotional and physical impacts on the body that can negatively alter health outcomes. So basically this can affect you in a way that is more than just your mental. Like, you know how we know that Black people, for example, already are more predisposed to certain health conditions. Well, she or other people in this situation would be predisposed to that, but there's an additional set of health issues with the trauma that going through this situation comes with. And like, I personally feel like I can identify with that because that's a whole nother story. Like, the we'll talk about that later. But I feel like it is important to talk about trauma. That's my main takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked how she talked about her journey, basically, from being told that she's white by her whole family, and experiencing the world with them telling her, like, you're not white. Are you sure you're white? You're Black. Like, what are you mixed with? Are you Black? Are you Indian? Are you whatever? And then how she did the DNA test and found out that her mother was lying to her all this time, and basically her trying to come to terms with that and trying to find her sense of identity in that, and going to different places and trying to pick up different things and learn about herself. She's trying to, the thing is, in searching for her identity, she's learning about herself in a way that she could never be taught from her mother, because her mother does not go through the world in those same experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on what you just said. And one thing that I like that she didn't shy away from writing about how this whole ordeal affected her relationship with her mother and her father. Like, she wasn't afraid to speak on how she was actually feeling about her mom and dad, because I know for me, if my mom had kept a secret like that from me, and told me that, like, the father who I had thought was my dad my whole life wasn't actually my father, and it was some guy that, like, she doesn't even know who he is, it would mess me up for life. And one thing that I like that she mentioned in the book is the fact that she and her mom went to therapy to discuss their issues together. And I feel like that's so important, the fact that she recognized that they needed, like, professional help in order to get over their joint trauma. Because we're recognizing the fact that Georgina has trauma, but then we also have to recognize the fact that her mother also has trauma. Her mother probably her mother being, like, Irish Catholic in Ireland, like, for years and years, the worst thing that a woman could be would be a single unwed mother. Like, they used to have, like, homes where they would send these unwed mothers to live until their babies were born, and then God knows what would happen after that. But it was such a cultural taboo, and this was the culture that her mother was brought up in. So I like that that trauma was also addressed in the book as well. And anytime we talk about therapy, I feel like we need to uplift people who need therapy. Like, we need to, like, support people who go out and seek that for themselves.
Exactly. And a lot of times, not saying something is a form of, like, trauma in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel
Yeah.
like I've dealt with that with my mom, my parents. Because remember, similar situation, when I turned 18, I got a big drop of news myself, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, obviously, like, now I know both my parents are mixed, which there's no denying that my dad's mixed. My dad is white passing, which in this, I don't understand how she thought that she was white, because she's not white passing. You can tell she Black. You could tell she mixed at least with Black. My dad, if somebody didn't know, they would just think he's straight up white man.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
remember, like, especially in high school and, like, going up into high school, I had problems with people, like, telling me that, like, oh, you're not Black, like, you're gray, because I'd see, like, my dad, or they'd be like, oh, you're not Black, like, you're Trini, blah blah. I'm like, first of all, no, none of my parents are from Trinidad, and they're telling me that like, oh, you're brown, you're brown, you're brown. And then when I turned 18, like up until that point, like I kept seeing stuff from my mom from when she was little, and like then the last name didn't match. So I kept asking her like, why does it say that? Why does it say that? She's like, oh, like I'll tell you when older, I'll tell you when older. So when I was 18, I'm like, listen, I'm an adult now. Like, what's the T? And then she told
You
me
said it like
she
that?
well, not the T
What's
because
the
that
tea?
wasn't the slang back then, but like tell me, like lay out on the table what's happening. So she had told me that like I had always known her mom had got pregnant with her young, but her biological dad fled the scene, and so who I grew up thinking was my grandfather isn't actually my biological grandfather. But obviously it's a small country, like everybody knows everybody. So people knew who her father was. So they were writing his, like in school and everything, they would write his last name as her name. So
Mm-hmm.
at that point, like 18 to now, so like what the last 10 years, I've been able to like try and get more information out of her and like get her more comfortable at talking. But I could see how my mom has had her own trauma in that experience of not knowing your father, everybody knowing him, saying that like, oh, she looks just like him, oh, this next and the third. And like obviously on the island, at least in the 60s, people weren't mixed. So she's like the only mixed kid, black and brown. And people are like kind of like taking her blackness away from her by saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously I come out looking like I do, where some people would even think that I have any black in me. They just think it's straight up brown when it's only a quarter. I'm just as much brown as I am white. And like obviously I feel like I had my own traumas with that experience of growing up like that and having people question, or not even question, but tell me my identity, or like not being accepted by any group.
Did you find that you got it worse from one group versus another?
Well, I mean, I could never fit in with the white kids in that way because I don't. There's no way that I would look white.
Mm-hmm.
And like the brown kids that, especially in high school, it's just like no, not really, because those brown kids were like straight, like Asian brown. Shanja, you don't count because you weren't in that group. You know the ones I'm talking about, who's just like the whole group is just brown kids. And then like obviously yes, like I had black friends, like my some of my best friends. However, the black groups, like I remember one time somebody had told one of our friends, it's like, why do you hang out with Anika? Like I wasn't black enough because they didn't feel like I was black enough for our friend to hang out with me. Or even I always felt like I couldn't I didn't feel comfortable joining the Afro Caribbean club because of those people in the groups. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like both of my parents are Caribbean, and like being Caribbean is a huge part of my identity and my personality, but I didn't feel comfortable to join those groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a shame. That's a real shame. Hi, Shalina.
And then
Um,
that reminds me of another quote in the thing. It says, racial socialization in families usually occurs between parents and children who share the same racial background. But when you are of a different race from your family or raised without a full understanding of your heritage, it is up to you to make sense of it all alone. So like that's another thing too, because both my parents are mixed, but they were both raised by their black parent. They don't know anything of the culture. Well, you can't really say that about my dad because white culture is the normal culture, but normal culture,
the
but
dominant
like
culture. Dominant culture.
dominant. But you know what I mean? Like people say white is normal and anything
Yeah.
not white
They say
is
white is
other.
people. Yeah.
So yeah, like because they were both raised that way, they raised me that way. I can't identify with brown people or with like other people because I wasn't raised with that knowledge. Like I don't have those experiences of culture from that aspect. Like every aspect of my upbringing, every aspect of my upbringing is from an Afro-Caribbean standpoint.
Mm-hmm. What you're speaking about right now kind of ties into what Georgina talks about as passing in the book. And she mentions there's more than one way to pass, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you look, but it could also be the way that you speak, how, your awareness of the dominant culture. So when she said that, when she was talking about passing, I felt like in some ways, even though I don't look white, I feel like I pass in terms of culture because I'm like even though I was raised with Sri Lankan parents, I can code switch. So when I'm at home, I know how to act the dutiful Sri Lankan daughter. But when I go out there, I know I don't have an accent. Like I know how to speak to people who are who are white or just like Canadian. And I'll still be more accepted versus someone who just came from Sri Lanka like a few years ago and they have a heavy accent and they don't know the ins and outs of the culture yet.
It's true. And it's like a lot of times we as kids, we get rid of our accent or our parents put us in school to get rid of the accent because they want us to better ourselves. Like not better ourselves, but they want us to do better in life.
Mhm.
I mean, like when I was young, like a little kid, I had a Bajan accent, but that's because everybody around me was from Barbados. Well, minus my mom. But I feel like my mom doesn't really have a BVI accent because she's the only person in Canada from the BVI.
Mhm.
But when I went to school, that all went away, especially like I was in private school. So it definitely went away.
Mhm. And
And now, like, if I can't, the thing is, when I like, I'll play around and like put on other accents, but I can't like do like a Caribbean accent. Like, even though I used to speak with that accent, I can't like
Mhm.
do it.
You mean like it's faded, like it's gone, like you can't
Like, I
remember
can,
how to do it.
like, if somebody's like, oh, like, say this like with accent, like, I can't.
Mhm. Yeah, like I guess it's the same way when we're talking about speaking foreign languages because I used like before I started primary school, like I only spoke Tamil at home. Like my Tamil back when I was little was probably so much better than it is now. But I wouldn't be like it would be hard for me to go back and reclaim that unless I spend years and years studying. And
Or I think it's just you'd have to immerse yourself.
yeah, I'd have to immerse myself so much more, but
You'd basically have to move back there. Not back, but you'd have to move there. Yeah, I know that's not going to happen, but I'm just saying. Same for
oh my
me.
gosh.
I can't see myself ever moving permanently to the Caribbean.
Hmm.
I've lived with a spoon in my mouth for far too long.
I've lived with flushing toilets for far too long. Um,
I've lived
what was
with
I?
being able to go to McDonald's or Costco or Walmart at just 5 minutes away for far too long.
Oh
Get
my
on a
gosh.
boat where?
Um, she talks a lot about after having learned about her black identity, she talks about learning how to navigate between her white identity and her black identity. And one of the topics she raises is the aspect of being called whitewashed or like being like a racialized person but not having any cultural awareness of the things that goes on in your race. And I felt connected to that because like me growing up in Canada, like obviously I'm gonna be whitewashed, but then when I go into like a community of other Sri Lankan people who are also born in Canada, I've I've actually been told multiple times that I act whitewash because I can't really speak Tamil, and certain opinions I have are very whitewashed. But I wonder why. I wonder how that term came about and why we treat each other like that.
I don't know.
Because it kind of creates this weird hierarchy of like who's more culturally aware
It's
versus
like,
people who aren't. Like, does that mean you're more Tamil than me because you know this? Or like how
but like the
like
thing is, it's so weird because the thing is, as a society, our our cultures want us to be white adjacent. Like they want so hard for you to have the light skin or like to be as close to white as possible. But when you are exhibiting those things, then the people who I guess aren't able to do that are like, why are you trying to be white?
yeah,
When
why
it's
are you
like
trying
you're the same people who are trying to get your children or like try and get to yourself to be like a white person, and all I'm doing is being educated.
to? Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not lightening my skin or like I'm not doing anything more to try and be white that you're calling me whitewashed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, somebody straightens their hair and like, but that's because their whole life they've been told you have to straighten your hair to be more like the white person. It's not because they want to necessarily be
It's another
white.
aspect of like code switching, right? It's one of the things you have to do in order to get you sadly have to do in order to get ahead in some careers and like and just like public spaces. Um, that's a good segue into another section of the book that she talks about, the section
About
where
the
she
hair.
about the hair. When she goes to like Dominican,
Vietnam. Oh,
D-
yeah. First
Dominican
was DR.
first was DR, but she also went to Vietnam to talk about the like where hair
Weaves.
weaves come
Yeah.
from. But what I was surprised to learn about was like a thing in the DR is the fact that like hair straightening is such a big deal to the extent that like employers will pay, like grocery store like companies will pay to have their female employees go to the salon and get their hair straightened because a it's like a symbol.
It's a respectability thing. Like you have to look
Yeah,
respectable, and
yeah, look respectable.
that's a huge thing within the Caribbean culture because even as a little kid, even now actually, if I have my if I have my hair out in curls and it's like day two, my mom would be like, both my parents actually, they'd be like, "Aren't you going to comb your hair? Like you're not supposed to comb curls." Because to them, like your hair is not supposed to be frizzy or whatever. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
sleek and nice. And that's the thing. Their child will never look respectable because no matter how hard I try, there's always flyaways.
Hmm. Those flyaways
And
are in now though.
well, this has been since how long have I my hair been long? Like 94 when I got a little bit of hair.
Hmm.
No, but like I'm not surprised at all about the Dominican thing too, because where do you think the Brazilian blowout came from? Like the greatest in blowouts is what the Dominicans do. They have your hair sleek and nice. Curls
Hmm.
where? But
Oh my gosh, but
what was upsetting was when she was in Dominican and she had her hair out and they're like, oh, like aren't you gonna comb that? Oh, you look like a Haitian, blah blah blah, because they're trying to say that Haitians are closer to African and that is looked down upon.
hmm yeah, that was another thing I learned about. I didn't know the DR had feelings like that towards Haitians.
Yes. Those two, they're fraternal twins, but they act like if they're not related. You
Mm,
share an island.
yeah,
And
it's
it's
so
like
sad.
the anti-blackness is so like this stems from just who took over, like who colonized you, the
Mhm.
Spanish versus the French. And it's like people really stomp on Haiti, but Haiti was the first of
To
all
gain
of them
independence.
to be to gain their independence, so they
Yeah.
should be admired.
Hmm. Yeah. There was that, I think that section about hair was like probably one of the longer chapters in the book, right? Like she also mentions how she went to the Vietnam and she visited, I don't know if it was like a hair salon or like a hair factory, but she was writing a piece on like the Vietnamese hair industry, and she got invited to come and watch these Vietnamese women cut off their hair and then have it be processed into wigs that would be sold across to North America, right? And I like the fact that she mentioned that she questioned whether these women were doing it out of just because they wanted to, or if they had a choice. It was something that like like they were in dire need of
Yeah.
money for.
She also questioned, it's like, is this just a voyeuristic thing? Like, they set them up just so that I can see the process of them cutting their hair.
Hmm.
And
And
like, they're
it's
just
very,
going and giving them like so little money to sell it at such a high
yeah,
profit.
yeah. I think they earn like 1% of the profit coming from selling their own hair, and it's weird to think about it, but what it's still like a male industry because all these like hair factories, hair salons in Vietnam are still owned by men, and
Mm-hmm.
their products are being sold across North America and Europe to women who are spending like upwards up to like I think people spend up to like thousands of dollars on like hair weaves, and the
Yeah.
money is being pocketed by men.
And do you ever realize, well, you probably don't go into hair stores because you can buy stuff at the regular store. But when you go to like hair stores or like what you would think is a black hair store because it's where all the black people shop for the hair stuff, it's always predominantly Asian people who own these places. So they're profiting off of black people.
Have you ever watched that Chris Rock documentary,
Yeah, good
Good
hair.
Hair? And he goes
Yeah.
into some salons that were like owned by Asian people, and he went
Hmm.
in trying to sell like natural
Black
hair,
hair. Yeah.
like black hair, and he tried to get a quote as to how much he could sell it for. And do you remember what one of the store owners said? He's like, "That's not even worth anything. You'll get nothing for that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I just found it very very interesting that
And
that
it's
this
funny because I follow this person on TikTok who it's a black, well, he's mixed, a black and white mixed guy who
mm,
he's he is a registered like hairdresser and he teaches like in a salon, like in a school, a beauty school. But he wanted his students to be able to deal with all types of hair, including like black hair. So he had to go on, I don't know if it was no, it was Alibaba. So, you know, like AliExpress, but like Alibaba's like the bigger, grander scheme of things. So he had to like get a custom order of texturized hair to make wigs to put on the dolls, the doll
mm.
heads. And like it cost him more money to get that done, but he's like, it's worth it.
And let's also mention that this is like like a billion-dollar industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
To did we just ask the question here saying why is it that there are so many Asian people who own these type of beauty stores? It's because it's a question of suppliers. So a lot of these like hair weaves are coming from countries like India and Vietnam. So they have easy access to the source, to like the products that are coming from these countries. So like
And
me
yeah,
being, yeah, like if you're like Vietnamese or like Indian, like it's you can just go home, go to the temple, sweep up all the hair that women cut off at the temple, and then bring it back here. And it's like the access to the supply is so easy because of those cultures.
it's the access. It's because they have that access, they're able to sell it at like I guess at cheaper prices than if a
Hmm.
black person or someone else were to do it. So because they're cheaper, Black people will go to where it's cheaper as opposed to supporting their own people, which is a problem where I find not only with that, but like the whole support Black businesses, and then they complain like, oh, but you're so expensive. But it's like, are you trying to support your people or not?
Yeah.
And then it's also like, who has the money freely there to open up a shop and to buy products? Like,
Yeah.
it's sad to say, but like a lot of the Black community don't have that. But a lot of Black folks do get a lot of money by doing hair. So it's like, okay, you go to the store, you buy the hair, bring it, and I'll install it for a price.
Yep.
I see you, Dibby, in my head. I see you going like,
interesting.
she would say that. Interesting.
There's, I think, to be honest, I think my favorite part of the book was the part where she travels to all these predominantly Black countries. And she went to a few, like we mentioned, she went to the DR, she went to Jamaica, she went to Vietnam. She also went
She
to
went to
Cuba.
I can never say the name right.
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua. Yes, Nicaragua. I can say it slowly, but I can't say it like at normal speed.
Yeah. And I the part that she wrote about during her time in Cuba, I thought was very interesting. The fact that like the outside world, what is our only, like, the only the only image of Cuba that we have is the image that Cuba presents on its travel brochures, really. And that's just like resorts, beautiful beaches. And then when we go there,
Stuck in the 1950s.
yeah, cars from the 1950s, vintage cars. And then we're also told that, like, since it's a communist country, everyone's treated equal, everyone has access to food, shelter, and jobs. But she goes further in depth about Cuba in the fact that she makes mention that, like, even though they say that they're like a racially equal country, like they treat their Cuban population equally, they treat their black Cuban population equally. She mentions like the statistics of like how much property, how much businesses are owned by like black Cubans versus like the white Cubans. And then she mentions how many Black Cubans are in positions of like CEOs or like presidents in like the top Cuban companies.
Or even as simple as how many white Cubans versus Black Cubans have a bank account. White Cubans are more likely to have a bank account as opposed to only 10% of Blacks.
But yeah, we don't like Cuba's like when you're just going there as a tourist and like just going to these random resorts, you will never see that unless you like leave the resort. But even then, I think that's very like a taboo thing to do. Like she mentioned in the book how it's like illegal to like hitchhike in Cuba if you're like a tourist. Like you can't just leave the resort for no reason. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought that was very, very interesting.
I mean, personally, I feel like I've seen like kind of the racial disparity in Cuba, because before I went, we found out that like a lot of people, they bring their stuff and then like they leave it there because the people working there don't have stuff. So like a lot of people just leave their flip-flops or their shirts or their toiletries for them to use. So it's like most of the time the people working in those things are the Afro-Cubans. The white Cubans don't need your help like that.
Or just like in terms of like appearance, the people who they have working like the front desk or like the people who are like in front of the resort waiting to like greet the incoming tourists, they usually have are like from a certain demographic. Like they're usually like they don't have really like Black Cubans out in front. If that
They're
makes
like the
sense.
groundskeepers.
Yeah.
And the maids. Or the
Yeah.
the people who work like the kitchen staff or even the bar.
Mm-hmm. What did you think about I wanted to ask you this specifically, but what did you think about the DNA test that she took? Because I know you did 20, was it 23andMe that
I
you did?
did both. I did
You did both.
23andMe and Ancestry.
Mm-hmm. She did, I think she did 3 different tests in the book. She did one, oh, she did
I know
one
she
where
did Ancestry.
she did Ancestry, but she also mentioned how she did so she did a DNA test that tested the DNA between her father, the one who raised her, and herself, and obviously that came back 0% conclusive, 0% related. But then she also, prior to that, did a DNA test between herself and her brother, and that one really freaked her out because the test came back inconclusive, which doesn't make sense because that's her half brother. So she goes
Mm-hmm.
into a whole section where she talks about how these DNA tests aren't always 100% accurate, and she goes into the politics of explaining how like DNA tests came about and how sometimes the information that these companies use, the information that they get regarding your DNA is sometimes fed to like government authorities, and they use that
Mm-hmm.
to create profiles of like certain individuals when for the police force, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Like how they could use it if you like commit a crime, or like if somebody commits a crime to like basically use your DNA to analyze to see. Um, so what's your question about the ancestry?
Did you find that like did you learn what you wanted to know when you took your DNA test?
Honestly, I took it because for the longest time my dad has been bothering me because he wants to know more about himself. So he did it too. But the
Mhm.
man's too nosy because my mom said she would do 23andMe, but not Ancestry. So his thinking was that he was going to do Ancestry and he's going to make me do Ancestry. So anything that does not match his would obviously be my mom's.
Mhm.
But I'm like, I know what you're up to, and I'm not sharing my results with you because my mother doesn't want me to. But I mean, it's very interesting because all three of us did the 23andMe, and you would not believe that my dad has more African ancestry than my mom. So
That's
he won't let
that's
her live that down. He's like, I'm blacker than you.
that's that's like that's very interesting, the fact that he has more.
Yeah, because I guess her her Indian side is more dominant.
Mhm. Look at Vic coming through with
Yes, because
the
my
knowledge.
friend is smart and she does all that
Girlfriend, look
biotech
at the
stuff.
knowledge. Yeah, she mentions the same thing in her book. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't know what I'd do if I did a test like that and my test came back inconclusive regarding if I was related to my brothers or not. I'd probably have a party.
Oh my gosh. I'm 39.1% sub-Saharan African,
Hmm.
but but I'm 36% European.
Interesting. Interesting.
And then
Lord.
23.8% Central and South Asian, which means I'm more white than I am brown. Oh,
Fascinating.
look, Shranja, I'm 6.5% Southern Indian and Sri Lankan. I know. I
Hey.
knew there was a reason why I had connection to you and Divi.
Hey. That means I should be giving you some kotarati.
Send it over.
Send it over. my gosh, I've always wanted to do one of those tests, but I feel like, yeah, it's true. We're sisters. Like, I've always wanted to do one of those tests, but I'm scared of what I'd find.
0.2% unassigned. So I'm 0.2% alien. Also, I just realized this was not planned, but I'm wearing a Virgin Gorda Strong shirt. Hashtag shoutouts to the BVI.
Represent your people.
Yeah.
Did you find it interesting with in Georgina's dating life? She kind of gave the impression that she was dating people who had the same background as her. At least with that one
Like
guy,
white, black.
like mixed, because there was that one guy she was dating who he was mixed, but he was adopted by a white mother and a black father, but he didn't know his biological parents at all. And it was her first serious relationship, so I think that was one of the keystones that sort of like bonded them together, the fact that they had like that common thing to bond on. But then it just all went down to hell because he cheated on her.
I
I,
don't
I,
know.
I like the fact that she was seeking people out though who had a similar story to her. Like not even just in like dating wise, like in terms of like just meeting friends who had similar stories. She was able to find quite a few people who were around her age or older and almost had like identical stories in the fact that they grew up not knowing what their actual racial identity was.
I mean, that definitely helps. Because, like, obviously, when you have a similar experience to somebody, you like bond.
Hmm.
I feel like that's why Shalina and I have become such fast friends because when we're talking, so many times we're like, oh my gosh, twins, 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 same experiences, same things happening. I'm like, okay, Shalina, we low key twinning.
That's not a
Like,
bad person to twin with. She's amazing.
no, like Shalina is bomb.
That's great. Yeah, she's the
The
mom.
only thing that we ain't gonna be twinning on, at least not anytime soon, is the vegan lifestyle. Because that's just not for me yet. But maybe one day. Gotta go veg first. But yeah, like people have similar experiences. Like I feel like that's why my parents get along so well because both being kids who their bio dad wasn't present, and then like growing up in an atmosphere which doesn't favor you, and then coming to Canada, they've had similar experience.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely helps having a community of people who are similar to you because then you have someone who's like they're always going to understand what you're going through. You don't have to like explain in detail how you're feeling. They just get it. Sometimes we underestimate how much that helps.
Hate to I know that her treats are good, and I have not I will eat vegan treats. I'll eat vegan like I'll eat Beyond Burgers because those are good. I'm just saying that fully converting to the vegan lifestyle is not for me just yet. But I love vegan stuff. I'll eat vegan cheese. Yes, I digress.
I think we missed talking about one important aspect. Her relationship with her father, the one that raised her.
Yeah, yeah.
I think she just wrote about it so beautifully how like how much heartbreak was involved when she realized that that wasn't her true, not her true, like her biological father, because inevitably the relationship changed, and the fact that her father also passed away before she
Well,
went
yeah,
through all of this.
she didn't find out that he wasn't her bio dad until after he died,
Hmm. It's just like
which is
how.
probably a better thing. That's probably a good thing. Because if she found out
Yeah,
before he died, then it'd been like, I love you still,
yeah,
but
but how could you? But it goes. You know what? A lot of people go through this. The fact that like the father that raises them, even though that's your dad, it still messes you up when you realize that's you don't have like a genetic connection to them. But like that's the one that raised you, that's the one who loved on you. That's gonna be the father that even if she finds, even if Georgina someday down the road finds her biological father, like he's never gonna be able to replace the one that she had growing up, right? That relationship, that love never goes away.
exactly, especially like, well, in her case, it probably wasn't, he probably didn't know about her being conceived. Like, he probably doesn't know that she exists. But people who, people like my mom, for example, who the man left, like, he knew that she was a thing and just left. Like, that takes a toll on forming other relationships as well.
Hmm.
Because I I don't know how true this is, but my dad told me before, he's like, the reason there's only one of like the reason I'm an only child is because she didn't want another one because she's like she doesn't want him to leave. So like I think that I don't want her to hear me because she doesn't like me talking about this, but I think she has like this deep thing where obviously going through trauma as a child and like seeing how her dad didn't essentially want her or he left, like she doesn't want that to happen to herself.
That's
And like
deep.
even doing the whole like ancestry, the whole 23andMe thing, like she had found a close match, which we me and my dad think that it could have been like her bio dad's sister type of thing. That but like people like the way that the whole like communication was going on their side, it seemed like if they kept wanting to get information out of her, but they didn't want to give any information, and she felt like something was fishy, so she cut off communications
Hmm.
because she's like, I'm not out here looking for anybody. Like they approached me, and it's like, I'm like, you could have siblings out there and not know. She's like, she doesn't care because like those aren't her siblings. Like that's not her father. I'm like, okay, like you don't have to have a relationship with him, but you have the chance to have a relationship with a sibling or a niece or whatever. And I'm like, you owe it to yourself.
There's always fear involved, right? There's
I
always
know,
fear
but
involved.
like you should do it for your child.
Yeah, but sometimes when it's like a lifelong trauma like that, it's just hard to it's just hard to move on from that and take the next step.
Like my dad has found half siblings. He's found bare half siblings because his daddy was a Rolling Stone, and he's like all there for. He's like, oh, found this sibling, or found this aunt, found this niece. I'm like, okay, good for you. But then on the other hand, she just wants to like stop production before it starts. And like I can honestly understand where she's coming from because that is trauma, and she's not trying to put herself through more trauma. To find Especially to find out it's like if she has younger siblings, you left her to go have children with someone else, or it's like did he have a family and he went down there and he got this woman pregnant and then he left to go back to his family. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, no.
Mm, yeah.
But whoever this man may be, he has a daughter out there and a granddaughter here.
Who want nothing to do with him, and rightfully so.
I'm interested. I want to see this person and cuss them out. Be like,
I agree with you on
how
that.
how dare you? My mother had a little infant. You weren't even there to see her grow, to see all that she could have offered in love and appreciation. She was a cute child.
And
And she
doesn't
had an even
matter.
cuter child.
Doesn't matter how cute the baby is. Some of these people are just dirtbag parents. They're
Listen,
just sperm donors.
then what business do you have inseminating a teenager?
Mm-hmm. Well,
If
I feel
you're a
like
teenager yourself, if
dirtbags.
you're, shame.
Um, well, that's a chapter in the book. Shame. But going into that, did you find it strange how the entire family, extended family, friends sort of just bought into this lie that
Too
Georgina
easily.
too easily, like no one questioned it, and maybe it was because of the way the parents reacted to being questioned, you know, like being like none of your business, it's none of your business. But I just find it very strange that they were able to live in this concocted fantasy for so long.
Guaranteed people were speaking about them behind closed
behind their
doors.
behind their backs. Yeah.
Be like, yeah, girl, did you know that girl? What's her mom's name again? That girl, Georgina. You know she black, right? But
Mhm,
her whole family saying she white.
mhm.
What part of that girl white?
I don't know. Do you remember during like one of the first chapters in the book how Georgina's reciting this incident that happened at school where, like in the attendance sheet, I think they have to list what race
Oh,
they
not
are or
the
something.
the registration. Yeah.
The
And her
registration,
dad just checked off like undecided or like, oh,
or like
prefer
no,
not to disclose.
no, he first checked off white, and then the teacher
Oh,
called
at
her
the
to the
very
desk.
beginning, like
Yeah,
during when she was doing that mock test thing. Okay, okay.
yes. So on the school enrollment paper, her parents had checked off white as to
Her
Georgina's
race.
race. And Georgina was sitting in class during a mock test, and then her teacher called her up to the front of the class, and she pretty much looked at that paper and said, like, Georgina, like, what's going on here? Why does this paper say you're white? Like something happened. Like she was very very rude about it. She was like, did something happen
She
to
was
the
bright and out of
mother?
order.
Were you switched at birth? Like the teacher was saying this in front of the whole class, and
And
everybody was
everybody's
listening.
just pretending. Everybody's pretending to write, but they're really listening.
They're just listening in, and this incident, I feel like it it was one of the first examples of what would constantly be happening to Georgina throughout her life. But I was very 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 just like jarred by the fact that a teacher would speak like this to a student. And also it's like, the fact that it's like the parents are the ones who fill out these registration forms, so you should be questioning the parents, not the child.
Exactly. It kind of reminds me how in our high school, for some reason, the school used to change people's information, like their language.
the information would the information would come back incorrect on the forms, and I don't know
Yeah,
why. That happened to me too.
even though every single year you fix it, you correct it, but yet every single year at the beginning
It
of the
comes back with
year,
the same
it comes
mistake.
back
Yeah.
saying some next thing.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. But I don't know if we mentioned this before, but she was born in 1992, so she's like coming up with us in a way. So this is like the story of like the 90s to early 2000s, and I'm like, some of the stuff that she went through, I'm like, I can't believe that like people are still talking about race like that today.
You know why they got away with it, Shalina? Because this is in the UK, and that
What's
is
in the
the OG colonizer. So
Mhm. Also, like, this is also mentioned in the book, and I thought it was pretty relatable. The fact that, like, us as a society now, we're not okay with just leaving people's identities be like being okay with not knowing what their identity is. Like we always have to put people in a box. We have to know 100% like, oh, you're this, you're that, but like we're not really like trained to be okay with not knowing. Like I'm pretty sure you still get this today and I get it too. Like people come up to me and ask me, "What are you? Like what's your background?" And I'm like, "What does that have to do with the conversation that we're having right now?"
I mean, I feel like I do get it a lot, especially when I was younger.
Mm.
I don't know. I feel like
But
now as I'm older, people just assume.
but it's like, oh, if I'm not so her issue throughout the book was the fact that she wasn't able to give them an answer and people would still try to dig in. But why are you not okay with not knowing? Like why do you so badly need to know? Like why do you need to put her in that box?
I don't know why. I don't know why people feel the need to do that where they can't just leave an undecided or open and open. They cannot just leave it open where it's just like I don't know or like I prefer not to disclose or whatever.
Mhm.
And I don't understand why people insist on like telling people what they are.
Mhm.
Like just if okay, put it this way. If us as a society we're open now to pronouns like he, she, him, they, them, why can't you be open to just the same thing but with race?
Mhm.
Like if there's gender fluidity, why can't there be race fluidity?
Oh no, no,
Not to
but
not
then
to say like Rachel, not to say like
yeah,
Rachel Dolezal.
that's what I was
No,
gonna say.
not transracial. I just mean like why can't you just be like if there's pansexuals who are just like they are attracted to who they to just people, not a sex. Why can't you just be like pan-racial?
I mean,
Just be.
I think I saw this report a while ago where it says like in the very near future in the US like the dominant race of people is gonna
It's
be
just
a
gonna be
mix
mixed.
mixed.
Yeah, because the thing is, if like interracial relationships are so like big since like probably the 80s to now, and like mixed people have kids with mixed people, there's going to be a lot of kids who look like me. There's going to be a lot of mix up children where both the
Mm-hmm.
parents are mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And the two mixes might not be the same mix. Because like there's people who like black and white mix with a black and white mix makes a black and white mix.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like there's going to be like black and Asian, white and Asian, or black and Asian, Indian and black, or Indian and Chinese and whatever else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Filipino and anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like the thing is, within these mixes, there's mixes. Because like if you say like, oh, Caribbean, black and whatever, a Caribbean black person is mixed as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or like American blacks, like y'all are mixed too. No matter how you could be dark like this microphone here, but you still have some kind of mixture in you probably.
Mm-hmm. I keep saying she mentions in this book the history of African Americans in the US and the fact that a lot of people aren't able to trace their their roots back not that many generations but like it's that being cut off from where you come from results in so many like negative effects that we are still learning about today like psychological we mentioned before health issues she mentioned the story of the TV show Roots
Mm-hmm.
and how I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it came out in like the 70s,
I think it
but
was the 80s.
like the 80s where during the time it was like a television event, like a phenomenon. it was one of the first times where you had like an all black cast telling the story of their own black history about black people coming to the US and what they went through. And Alex Haley was one of like the first black people who was able to research his own family line and connect it back to the first person who was taken as a slave from Africa to the US. And he was even able to find the tribe that that person was from in Africa, and I think it was somewhere in like Ghana, and his name was Kunta Kinte, and it was such a
And he was a Mandingo warrior.
he was a Mandingo warrior, and it was such a like a big breakthrough because now I think he created a trend within the community where people were starting to get interested in finding out where they come from and like trying to and like even just like recording it, because the fact was he recorded it, he wrote it down so it could be passed down to the generations that came after him in the family.
Exactly, but that's a story that not a lot of people have, because same way like a lot of Americans don't know where they come from. Like I find that a lot. I find like from being on social media and stuff, a lot of Americans like to be like, well, we don't know where we come from. That's why our race is black and our ethnicity is black. But the same goes for Caribbean people. Like we went through the same set of slavery. Some of us didn't even like slavery ended for the United States, but it didn't end in these other places.
Mm-hmm.
So like instead of being like a us versus them mentality, it should be a we're all in this mentality. Like
Yeah.
we all experienced being through we all experienced our ancestors being a part of slavery. What's this?
Mm-hmm.
Trust me, Chilena, it's hard.
It's hard. It's really difficult, even for me, even though I know I'm like 100% Sri Lankan, but there's like actual people, there's actual like empty spots in my family tree because my grandpa was an orphan and he had no idea who his family was, and he wasn't able to figure out like which part of like India that he came from, because he originally came from India and like they dropped him off in a boat in Sri Lanka with a bunch of other orphan kids. He had no idea. And then when I asked my dad, like, do you ever have any like curiosity as to whether or not you have first cousins on your dad's side? And my dad's just like I have no tools available to me to even go back and research that far, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. It's I feel like it's easier now because we have things like ancestry.com. The internet is like a big help, but in a lot of ways, like unless you have like those elders in your family that can give you that information, then how else are you going to be able to find out?
But you see, Shranjit, that's another thing. So obviously the oral tradition of passing down is a huge part in like genealogy and stuff, like obviously passing down whatever. But because our ancestors have gone through so much trauma or they've gone through different things, they shut their mouth. They don't want to share.
Mm-hmm.
Cause it's like to go back to my mom. I always ask her about like what information do you know about your dad? And she's like, oh, I don't know anything. And like her mom had gave her name before, but she forgets name. I'm like, your mom's still alive. Why don't you ask her? But she's scared to ask. She's like, oh, well, you can ask her. But I'm like, it's your dad.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why are we as a society, not even as a society, why are we as like a group of people like so scared to share with our own family? Like I tell my mom all the time, anything that you do or anything that affects you, it affects me because I come from you. If I do something that doesn't affect you, but every single thing that you or anybody above you has done affects me. So your history is my history. Like, we need to share. It's important. It's important to let your children know not only the history in the books, but you need to pass on your own family's history because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Your children need to be proud of the people that came before them. And yes, you need to share with them the bad things too.
Mm-hmm.
Because so that they know to not do that. Or they know like, okay, like this was done in the past, like I need to not do that. Or like we might be susceptible to this. We're not gonna do that.
Mm-hmm. On a side note, because I just remembered this, it took me reading this book to learn that Pete Wentz from Fall Out Boy is half Jamaican.
Really?
Yeah, I did not know that. I thought his hair
There's
was
a lot of
dyed
white
black.
passers.
I, I'm shocked. And then I actually researched it, and I saw a picture of his mother, and I'm like, oh wow, but he's like the exact picture of his father. He just has his mother's black hair.
That's like um rest in peace, Cameron Boyce.
Hmm.
People look at him and they just think, well, sorry, they just thought he was a white boy, but he is the spitting image of his father. It's just that his father like looks black,
Hmm.
and Cameron just looks like a white boy. What was I gonna say? Um, Shoot, I lost it. Oh, okay. I seen on TikTok how okay, so obviously there's white passing people, but then people would say that people what people are saying now is white passing is not actually white passing. For example, Georgina or like Mariah Carey, those people you can tell that they are mixed or something in the very least, but because so many white people are like race fishing or whatever it's called, it's making people like unaware. So like people like Kylie Jenner and Ariana Grande, they're changing up their skin color, they're changing up whatever. So it's making people think that like that is what that's what like ethnic people or whatever look like. So because Kylie Jenner and like Ariana are trying to like make themselves look more ethnic, the people who just look like that normally are being passed off as white passing when in actuality they're not. They're just
Hmm.
like they're clearly mixed. Like there's a lot of people you can look at them and you can tell like I can tell in my soul that you're mixed. But I don't know, like people are having such a hard problem these days like figuring out like if somebody's like actually a BIPOC person or not.
Hmm. Yeah, I do feel like Ariana Grande and what's her name,
Kylie.
Kendall,
Kylie,
Kylie. Kylie's the small one, right? The little one. She's like the youngest one,
the
or no?
youngest one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like their whole aesthetic is trying to look. They're trying to make themselves look mixed because I guess that's what's popular in pop culture right now. But then they're taking opportunities away from like actual mixed people, like the fact that they're bracing all these like covers and get all these opportunities, and then just because they're copying their aesthetic from the people who are actually from that demographic. But that's a whole another discussion.
Uh-huh. To the point where it's like people would be mixed with something and white, but because of like how this is like a huge thing in society, people just view them as white, even though you can clearly look at them and see that they're not just white.
I get their names mixed up.
Well, Kendall and Kylie are the two Jenners. Kendall's the oldest one and the skinny one and the model.
And she's the
Kylie's the one
cutest.
with the lip kit and all the makeup.
She's the one that went out with Tyga, right? That's her husband. Let's not even waste 1 second of our screen time talking about them, though. Um, yeah. So, Anika, do you have any like closing thoughts on the book? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk
I don't
about?
know. I feel like I said a lot today, and I said a lot of things that I shouldn't have said because my mom might beat me. So this might be deleted after.
Oh boy. Um, yeah, I think one of the things that I admired most about her is that Georgina, is that the fact that she actually did set about to learn more about her cultural identity. I don't know if we mentioned this before, but she mentioned in her DNA test. Whether she,
Shalina. Okay, so technically the Kardashians, so technically Kim, Courtney, and Kim, Courtney, and
Kim Courtney, the other one, Chloe.
Kim, Courtney, and Chloe. Technically, Kim, Courtney, and Chloe are half Armenian because their dad, Rob, Kim, Courtney, Chloe, and Rob Jr. are technically half Armenian. And then Chris is white.
Yeah, they're
But
half Armenian.
but the Jenners, so Kylie and Kendall are just full white because their father is, what's her name again? Used to be Bruce Jenner.
Caitlyn.
Caitlyn. Their father's Caitlyn Jenner.
Hmm. But if you're Armenian, does that mean you're like racial? Like, if you're Armenian, does that mean you're a person of color, though?
Well, Armenia is in Asia.
Yeah, but technically Russia's in Asia too, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on what kind of Russian you are, I guess. Like, I mean, maybe because you know how the term for a white person is very loosely used, Caucasian. So technically, Armenians would be Caucasian because they're from
Caucasus,
the Caucasus
yeah,
Mountains.
which would also include like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Georgia, and one more country, Turkmenistan, right? So I guess if you think about it like that, they might be racialized people, but very interesting.
So you can look at it the way you want to, Shalina. They could be partially BIPOC, but if you don't consider Armenia to be a BIPOC place, then they just white.
I'm trying to
But
think.
the other two, the little ones, they're just white.
But they all have mixed kids, except
Yeah.
for the other one. What's her name?
Courtney.
Courtney? Yeah. Let's not talk about them. I don't want to spoil this. I'm trying to think what other topics that were raised in the book that we didn't touch upon. Um, oh,
Um
I was gonna say I really like the fact that like once she found out that she was uh I think it was like 43% Nigerian based off her DNA test, that she just didn't like find out and then just like close the book on it. She actually went on like a cultural, like a journey to
journey.
learn more
Yeah.
about herself culturally, right? And I feel like anyone who's like born or raised abroad from from their country of origin, there's always going to be like cultural learning involved. Like like for me, example, like me being raised in Canada, being Sri Lankan, like I had to like there are things about my culture that I obviously had to learn about from my parents, which if I were in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't have I would have more access to learning about these things culturally because I'm in my home country, whereas here it's not the same. Like it takes more time, like, and your only teachers are your parents, whereas like if you're back home, the whole community is your teacher. Every time you go out, you're just with the Sri Lankan people, and it's not like that here. And then I guess it's like that cultural learning is even more evident when you're someone who's like mixed race and you haven't had that you haven't had access to both of your parents, right? Because then it's just on you to learn. But even with them, yeah, they're Armenian, but like, I don't, sometimes I wonder, do you know anything about being Armenian other than the fact that, like, I know they made a joke about Armenian women being the most hairy women on the planet. They actually said that. I didn't say that. They said that. But like, like, one of the most well-known things about Armenia is the fact that in like 1910, they had a genocide, right? And a lot of the people who are now living in North America and in Europe who are of Armenian descent are refugees from that genocide. So I'm like, do you even have the cultural awareness of like the things that have happened to your people? Like I wonder about that sometimes. Like are you passing that knowledge down to your kids, or has that all just gotten erased because of your wealth and your popularity?
I would say the latter, but can't really assume.
Mhm. Yeah. But yeah, I just want to say no matter who you are, there's always like cultural learning that you have to do if you're raised abroad, if you're born abroad. It's just some people have better access to that to those resources than other people.
I mean, you can still type them in there, Divi. But yeah, it's also a lot easier to access certain things depending on how you identify. So what I mean by that is say you identify as Jamaican, or like your parents are Jamaican, or your grandparents are Jamaican, and you're trying to identify, like you're trying to learn about that culture in in the GTA, like in where we are right now, that we're in a space where it's easy for you to get that, because everywhere you turn there's Jamaicans. Any single time there's events, there's Jamaicans. If there's any Caribbean event, it's usually a Jamaican event.
Yeah.
So
And we're
if you're trying to learn about your culture as being like a Jamaican, it is easy. If you're from a smaller island, it's not as easy. Or if you're from a smaller country, it's not as easy. Like if if you have like a big community, it's a lot easier. So I think it's easier for Filipinos because there's a lot of Filipinos in this area. It's easy for Jamaicans. Maybe even it's easier for Tamils or Sri Lankans in general, because there is a big
oh, it's super
population.
easy. It's super
Yeah.
easy.
So like I think it depends on what you're trying to search for.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of Trinidadians, a lot of Guyanese,
Yeah. We're really
but I
privileged.
wouldn't say I haven't seen a lot of Panamanians, people from
Hmm.
Panama,
Hmm.
or like I haven't met a lot of. I don't think there's a lot of people from Guatemala.
Hmm.
Definitely not a lot of people from any of the two Virgin Islands.
I mean, even then, we still benefit from the fact that we live in a huge urban center where like all these cultures come together and live in somewhat harmony. But we wouldn't if we were anywhere else, like in small town Canada, like God forbid some
No,
small town in like Alberta or Manitoba,
or Northern Ontario.
we wouldn't even know to have this conversation.
We'd probably be the one and only colored person in the area,
For miles, we wouldn't even
unless you're
know.
unless you're like unless you're in an indigenous area, then obviously those people are BIPOC as well, but
Hmm.
in a different type of way.
Hmm. Yes, very, yeah. I don't know if everyone here saw the news, but in Kamloops the other day, they just found out that at this residential school that operated from like 1960 to I think it was 1890 to 1960, sorry. Um, that underneath this school were the bodies of 250 indigenous children. So they were buried underneath this school for God knows how many years, and they were just able to figure out the exact number of kids that were laid to rest at this school. So
It's
that's,
so sad.
yeah. And I think this was the largest residential school in Canada. But imagine those schools were all over Canada, so I just imagine what's underneath the yards at those schools. They were they were religious monsters. Ridiculous. And we can't even call them schools. Like they were just pretty much hubs for these children to work until they die.
Exactly, like free child labor.
Hmm. And it's another example of this community of people being cut off from their language, from their culture, from the elders in their community. And
And it
God
just
knows.
had like lasting effects because say these children did survive, then
Mhm.
they have the trauma and it's passed on through generational trauma to their children. They're unable to give their child the type of love that they need because they were starved for that love as a child themselves.
Yeah.
And just a cycle.
Anika, I was reading up on that school. So the community knew the First Nations community that was in that area knew that there were bodies underneath the school, but they never knew how many. And
Hmm.
they kept trying to get permission from the government to go to the school and dig up, like actually like dig up
Yeah.
the yard just to count. And the government always blocked it, saying like, no, we're not going to let you do that. And they actually brought in the First Nations community. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they brought in a radar specialist to come in and actually like with radar survey the property to count the number of people, and they were actually able to finalize the number to 215 bodies underneath the yard.
So they didn't actually dig it up. They just radared it.
They radared it, but they did. They're I think they actually did dig it up and count it, but
So I was gonna say,
now
how did they get around the government? Like, did they wear the
because now
government
they have no
down?
choice. Now the government has no choice. It's with the news. It's with the media
Well,
outlets
now,
now.
but I mean, I thought that they had dug it up, and then that's how the
Mm.
news found out.
I think they're still in the process of digging them up, and now they're doing like DNA matchups to find out which families these children came from. But yeah, that's just one school. Imagine all the other schools in this country that are waiting to be investigated.
It's a shame. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
shame because you know that this is not an isolated case. There's definitely a lot more out there.
Mm-hmm. We went off topic.
This
That
is
was
technically on topic.
technically on topic, yeah. I mean, I don't know if her parents, like Georgina's parents, knew just how much damage that they were going to be doing by not telling her the full truth of who she was. Oh, Shalina, like
That's like Shalina. Have I ever showed you my Canada Day jacket that I made last year? Let me quickly grab it.
Shalina, like I always say, why do we celebrate Canada Day when like there's First Nations communities who don't have access to clean drinking water? Like the water that comes in through their pipes is like mucky brown, and yet we're celebrating Canada Day for what?
Shalina just says this as her and I are planning to go away for Canada Day, but I digress.
I'm not celebrating Canada Day. I'm just going away.
It's just a little coincidental that we're going to the so-called nation's capital for the nation's birthday.
We're not going to celebrate Canada
And
Day.
if COVID had got itself in order, I'm sure that you'd want to go see the fireworks and the big parade that they have.
Maybe.
Exactly. Anyways, so Shalina, I made this jacket last year, my Canada Day jacket. So there's the leaf there, and the heart is because Canada is supposedly such a good nation. But this is the important part. The sides here, it represents the bloodshed for our so-called nation because so many Indigenous lives were taken because of it. And then I have the medicine wheel. Got Indigenous lives matter, life over property always. Challenge colonialism, and property is never worth more than the life. And then it says justice for Colton. If you remember that Colton, I forget his last name, but the guy who was killed on farmland for having the vehicle there. So yeah, that's my Canada Day jacket, and it has a lot of meaning to me. And I actually I sent it in for one of my final projects for my Indigenous Studies class, and I got 100%.
Beautiful jacket, Anika.
Thank you.
Do you have any closing thoughts?
Great story, a story that a lot of us can identify with, regardless if you're mixed or not. Like, I think everybody could find a takeaway from this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she's a wonderful writer.
Especially with, as you said, the world is becoming more mixed. So everybody needs to be aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. Georgina Lawton is a wonderful, wonderful writer. I think she raised a lot of good topics in her memoir. And yeah, I learned a lot.
I'm so glad that this book caught my eye while at work.
Yeah. And I have to say, she also has an audiobook out right now for this book, and I think that just hearing her talk about her own experiences just adds a whole other aspect
Dimension.
to it. Yeah, a whole other dimension to it. So if you guys are interested in that, check out her audiobook too.
All right. So our next meeting is going to be on June. Is it June? No, today's the 30th. So June 13th. Right? We're second and the last.
Yeah.
So June 13th. And the book we're going to be talking about is Lakshmi's Mooch.
I'm excited for this one.
It is a great book. I read it. I feel like this is another book that a lot of kids, especially brown kids and mixed kids, can identify with for their mooch.
We'll move down to female representation.
Also, seeing as I have my girl Shalina in the chats here, she has a podcast episode dropping on June 2nd and June 3rd, correct? And the episode is actually with Shranja and I, as the three of us talk about books from our childhood, the 90s and early 2000s. So stay tuned for that. It was fun filming, and I'm sure it's going to be fun to listen to it again.
Yeah, it was super fun to film, and it jogged a lot of memories that I didn't even know I had. So, gotta check it out.
A lot of laughs, too.
A lot of laughs. Shalina, I'm still looking for that Abby Hayes TV show, but I know for a fact that I saw something out there like that. So I'm still looking for it. It's either by the same artist, not the same author, but it's by the same artist. So I'm looking for it. I haven't forgotten that.
Anything else? I think that's it. We've got Lakshmi's Mooch, and then the book after that is The Vanishing Half.
Funny enough, Georgina Lawton quoted The Vanishing Half in this book. I was excited to see it. It was, you know how in the beginning of each chapter.
At the beginning of each chapter, yeah.
Yeah.
She actually quoted a lot of good ones, like Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora Neale
Hurston. She quoted Octavia E. Butler from Kindred.
She quoted Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Yeah. For Americana.
And I think she really liked that book too.
I feel like a lot of people don't read those things, but those things always catch me. Like, I love the little quotes, especially. Okay, I know I'm a super fangirl, but in Far Sector, I really love how at the beginning they have the quotes and like how throughout it they have quotes.
The quotes kind of give you an idea as to what you're in for in terms of the chapter.
Exactly. Like,
and it also just introduces you to other similar writers, right?
Yeah, and it's just so poetic. Like, was she never to be free of it? That fear which crouched, always, deep down within her, stealing away the sense of security, the feeling of permanence from the life which she had so admirably arranged for them all, and desired so ardently to have remain as it was. And that's Nella Larson from Passing.
All right, guys. So thank you for joining us today. I think we have like our crew. We have like a little crew going on here that I expect to see every Sunday that we do this. So I just want to say
we got Shalina, we got Sean, we got Divi, and we got Greg. Y'all are our top 4. And Vic. Can't forget Vic.
You can't forget Vic.
Vic's always there when she can.
Vic is VIP.
Y'all are the top 5, and we need to come up with a little name for you guys, but I don't know.
Yeah.
For right now, you're the BGITR bookworms.
I just say the crew. That's a mouthful.
The bookworms? Oh my gosh. If it ever happens.
It's like a Dear Diary video. Just imagine that you're talking to him.
With my luck, he's dead. Or should I say with his luck?
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, and don't forget to follow us. Well, you guys all follow us. But anybody who's watching the replay, don't forget to follow us. Fresh Princess 92 with the E and Fresh is the number 3. And Books Bounty 28. 28. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Love you guys. Bye. See you in 2 weeks.
See ya.